Today's episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast is brought to you by Baylor Scott & White Sports Performance Center, athletes made here. The Sports Performance Center was developed with one goal in mind: to maximize human performance through movement and recovery. Their team of expert performance sports coaches and trainers will guide you to achieve your performance goals. That's the Baylor Scott & White Sports Performance Center, located at the Star in Frisco. This episode is also brought to you by Allen Dental Studio. Located off Bethany Drive in Allen, their office was designed with you, the patient, in mind, which means an excellent and enjoyable experience. From cosmetics to implants, you deserve a perfect smile, and Allen Dental Studio can make that happen. Also, don't want to leave out another longtime friend of the podcast, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes. With locations in Carrollton and Dallas, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes offers an affordable, high-quality alternative to senior living. Call now at 469-400-7650. That's Texan, spelled T-E-X-S-E-N, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes. Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Bryan Murphy, and only Bryan Murphy. Just a two-man panel for this one.
That's all you need.
That's right, man. Yeah. As we preview Week 7 of high school football season, see what we got going on in our coverage area. And obviously, Bryan, as is tradition, that means starting off with our reader-voted Game of the Week. First off, big thanks to everybody who went to starlocalmedia.com and voted on this week's poll, but a big, extra, super special thanks to the folks out in Frisco, which that city is becoming kind of the standard bearer for the Game of the Week poll this year, because it feels like any time we get a Frisco versus Frisco matchup, the masses show up in droves, and that was sure enough the case once again, man. Thursday kickoff, 7 o'clock out at the Star. Lone Star versus Independence. Probably on paper, if you're just talking about just sheer resumes, what they've accomplished up to this point, probably the most worthy game of the 5 on the poll this week for a Game of the Week selection. So yeah, Bryan, let's talk about it, man. It's going to be a very Bryan Murphy-centric episode with these being two teams that are very near and dear to you. I'll chime in what I can, because nevertheless, you look at what these two teams have done leading up to this point, and they're almost dead ringers for each other in terms of just the way that they have taken care of business. They're both undefeated, not only for the regular season, but in district play, both 5-0, 2-0 in 5A Division I. And then you look statistically. I mean, you have Independence, which is averaging more than 600 yards per game.
Which is more than Lone Star.
And more than McKinney North. For as much as we've talked about McKinney North's dynamic offense, Lone Star is actually averaging about 30 yards more per game.
You mean Independence? You said Lone Star?
Oh, yeah, my bad. Independence, yeah. Independence averaging 611.5 yards per game. That is number one in the area. They're averaging 55.8 points per game, which also is number one in the area.
Yeah, more than Lone Star.
Yeah. You compare that to Lone Star, though, which is not that far behind.
2 points less, I think, something like that.
It's 564.6 yards, number 3 in the area. Yeah. They're number 4 in the area and scoring at 54.2. And then defensively, it is almost identical as well. Lone Star's defense allowing 209.6 yards on average, number 6 in the area. Independence, 222.8, number 7 in the area. And then in terms of points allowed, Lone Star, 9.8 points allowed, number 3 in the area. Independence, 11 allowed, number 4 in the area. I mean,
something's got to give.
Even right down to their margin of victory, because they've won almost all of their games in blowout fashion. Lone Star has won its 5 games by an average of 44.4 points. Independence, an average of 44.8. It's, like I said, it is crazy how we're halfway through the season and these two teams have been almost identical in how they have gone about amassing their undefeated records. The difference, though, is that only one of these teams has that big old shiny number 1.
Okay, and only one of these teams has gone into Highlander Stadium and beaten Highland Park on the road. Independence, they've had some blowout wins. They've done what they've had to do against quote-unquote lesser opponents. But they don't have that marquee win yet. They've played Frisco Memorial. God bless them, second year in a program. They've beaten Frisco Heritage to start off district play. They've beaten Liberty. A team that didn't win a game last year might not win a game this year, depending on what they do against a team like Heritage. So 2 not so impressive wins on the resume. I mean, you did what you're supposed to do. You won by 50 plus against those teams. Well, then you play J.J. Pierce, a team that Wakeland also played in a tough game there as well. And then they started the year off with, let's see, and they had Denton there as well. Another team, Lone Star, played as well. So a common opponent there. They both beat Denton by a lot.
Pretty sound.
They beat Denton. Lone Star beat Denton by 70. Independence beat them 63-7. So you kind of look at common opponent, the same deal there, but they haven't been tested. They've essentially taken the last 2 weeks off, against Liberty and Heritage. The real test comes this week. Whereas Lone Star, they've been tested and they've still been blowing the mess out of these teams, blowing them out of the water. And, they were tested against Highland Park, and that game wasn't even all that close given the 11-point difference. They really won that game by 3 or 4 scores. Yeah. If you watch the game, they played a really good Little team, a team that might make the playoffs, and they made them look silly. They made Wakeland look silly, another team that's poised to possibly make the playoffs, and they're making these teams look silly, and I think it might hurt them that Independence hasn't seen a playoff caliber team really yet. I mean, if you're looking at the schedule, who have they played that's a playoff team? At least in 5A. I don't know about Pierce in 6A, but if you're looking at these teams that they played 5A opponents, it's like, well, they might get a wake-up call this week against Lone Star. But, I mean, Independence, they're still stacked. I mean, the numbers are insane with Braylon Braxton and Keon Wafer and those guys. And they lose their number 1 running back, Logan Brungart, who was just a stud, but one of the best athletes to ever come through that program. And then they just switched their identity over to a passing attack. And it has a lot to do with Braylon Braxton. But they haven't faced a defense like Lone Star. I've heard so many things from so many coaches that Lone Star defense is so special. They can bring 3 guys on the defensive line. They can just rush 3 guys. They still get pressure. They can rotate guys, bring in 2 more guys off the sidelines, keep them fresh. They have about 5 or 6 guys that can really go on the defensive line. Then you look at their secondary, and almost every guy is 6'3" and up. In the secondary, Torrin Pittman and Jalen Ford just came back from a brief suspension for some off the field issues, but he's in there now. He just committed to Utah. I
saw that
yesterday, actually.
That pipeline, man.
Utah just reels him in from Lone Star.
Of all the schools for Lone Star to have a pipeline Utah, the Utah Utes, who have Jason Shelley, Jalen Dixon, the vaunted quarterback receiver combo from back in the day. Yeah, linebacker Jalen Ford verbally committed yesterday,
and now they have arguably a top 3 or top 4 linebacker of all time to ever come through that program, and that says a lot because there's been some studs. Nick Bolton's over there killing it in Missouri. I don't know if you've noticed that. He's actually playing.
I believe it, man.
But yeah, so then Jalen Ford and then Sterling Shepto and just they're just so loaded. Alessio Rusalilo is leading that linebacking core at the middle linebacker position. He might be the best in the district. He's just all over the place. There's just not a weakness on Lone Star, and you talk to coaches and you give the eye test. I've seen them play a couple times, and I saw them play against Highland Park. I saw them play against Wakeland. I saw most of their highlights against Little Elm, and it's just, where's the weakness on this team? And this is actually the first time I've seen Independence play this year. Yeah. So this will tell me a lot, but also at the same time might not tell me much, because I've only seen Wakeland play once this year, and it was against Lone Star, and that's not really good, meter to test where they really are, because a lot of teams will get blown out by them. But if Independence comes in there and they play them really tight, spoiler alert, Lone Star should win this game. I picked them to win this game. I don't see them losing to anyone in district. That's just how it's going to go. That's how good they are. But this could be a good gauge for Independence, and see if they only lose by 2 or 3 touchdowns, that's a strong showing. They could be up in that upper echelon, somewhere where Highland Park kind of was as well.
Because with Independence, and I do think this game is a bit more fascinating from their vantage point. It's a little more interesting just because, again, when you're Lone Star, when you've beaten Highland Park in their own place, it's really tough to get any more impressive than that as far as what you can realistically show us that we don't already know. But yeah, what you say about Independence getting up to this point, it is worth noting just that schedule that they have played. I added up the combined records of their opponents is just 8-19. So, and of those, like you say, maybe Pierce makes the playoffs out of that district in 6A, but nevertheless, though, they haven't really faced anybody that can truly pressure them, and that's why I wonder from your vantage point, like, what do you look for in Independence? How do you kind of gauge what? Because you went on record last week in saying that you think Independence could be the second best team in this district. So we're now about to see what the theoretical gap is between 1 and 2 in this district. So what does Independence? And this is, again, I know sight unseen. You haven't seen what they bring to the table yet, but what do they kind of need to show you in this matchup as far as maybe validating their standing as potentially the second best team in the district?
So Kevin Rochelle last week, the Wakeland standout receiver who has 13 touchdowns this year, he's been phenomenal. He was locked down by Lone Star secondary. If if they can get that connection between Braxton and Wafer going, and a team has not been able to do that this year. Teams haven't been able to consistently move the ball or even through the air against that secondary. We saw what happened with Highland Park. 4 interceptions were thrown. They couldn't even throw the ball with their stud quarterback they have over there. But if they can get that connection going, score early. That's another thing that Lone Star has done. Lone Star has punched its opponents in the mouth from the very first play of the game. That's what they do. They don't waste any time. They did it to Wakeland. They did it to Highland Park. They were up 28-0 by a blink of an eye against Little Elm. And it's not just Garrett Rangel to Marvin Mims. That has been spectacular, but it's that defense. They either force a turnover or force a 3-and-out on the opposing team's first possession, no matter what. And then next thing you know, Lone Star is going to score, which they usually score on the first play of the game. I've seen them score on the first play of the game twice this year to Marvin Mims, usually a 40, 50, 60, 70-yard play. And then the opposing offense can't do anything against the defense, the Lone Star defense, on the next drive, and next thing you know, they score again. And that's just the thing that Independence is going to have to do. They're going to have to weather this storm, because if they fall behind like everyone else has to Lone Star, by 3 touchdowns or three or four scores when the first quarter is still in play, then they might sway them away from their game plan, and that's not what they want to do. If they can, I don't know. If you're Independence, do you receive to start the game? Do you want to?
Yes.
And then see what you can do, and then.
Because I think this game is, you can make a case it will be won or lost in the first quarter at the very least, or show if Independence is going to have a fighting chance.
True.
I should say. They can very well lose the game in the first quarter, but because that's where, like you said, Lone Star has been at its best. And wouldn't you know, I actually did some numbers on this, Brian, averaging nearly 24 points in the first quarter this season.
Sounds about right.
They have had 20 first quarter drives in total, and they have scored points on 18 of them.
Where are the other 2 they didn't score?
Ironically enough, there was one in those first 2 games of the year against Richland and Denton. There was one in each of the first quarters there where they didn't. They either punted or whatnot. But yeah, or had a turnover on downs. But yes, outside of that though, since again from Highland Park, Little Elm,
and the
Wakeland,
competition has gotten even harder since Richland and Denton, and they've gotten even better.
Oh yeah, against Highland Park, Little Elm, and Wakeland, they have been flawless. They have scored on every first quarter drive. So yeah, that's where if you're Independence, you just have to be ready for that barrage, because that's the only way that Lone Star knows how to roll. So if you can get out of there without, staring up at a 24-0 deficit or something to that tune, then I
don't think anyone has scored. I know that I don't think there's been a touchdown in the first quarter against Lone Star this year, because Highland Park, they only had 3 points at halftime. Little Elm, I think they had 6 points going in the second half, and Wakeland didn't score until the second half.
I believe it.
Yeah. So if you can score a touchdown in the first quarter, you're in good shape. If you're down maybe by a score, if this game is tied at the end of the first quarter, oh boy, where
because that's going to make Lone Star that's going to, nobody's even been able to so much as make them uncomfortable this season. First, no one's ever been able to make either of these teams uncomfortable. They have not yet trailed.
And see, we're talking so much about Lone Star and saying what a
lot of this stuff applies to Independence too. They have not trailed yet this season either. So that's and that's kind of one of the fun little underlying subplots, is that for the first time all season, one of these 2 teams is going to be made uncomfortable. And as to how they respond to that, well, that's going to kind of say a lot about their mental makeup. I guess especially if you're a team like like an Independence who really hasn't been cracked in the mouth yet. At the very least, you knew that Lone Star was going to be on pins and needles during that Highland Park game just because of all that surrounded that one. Just with Independence, though, they've had teams that have scored on them in the first quarter. They've been in 7-6, 7-3, and whatnot, but nobody that's been able to really kind of sustain any sort of offensive rhythm against them. So you just wonder how either of these teams is going to respond once the other inevitably does what it's, does it as it has been all season.
How's Lone Star going to respond if Braylon Braxton hits Wafer and they get the ball first and they score on a 50-yard touchdown somehow? They beat that secondary, something that they're not accustomed to seeing this year. How are they going to respond?
For sure. And that matchup right there, the battle of the stud wide receivers, we have 2 of the most prolific wideouts in the entire Metroplex on display in this matchup. We went into lengthy detail on Monday's podcast about the Marvin Mims show and just the special year that he is putting together. Just to quickly refresh, Marvin Mims, 40 catches, 1,054 yards, 12 touchdowns, an average of 26.4 yards per catch. He is leading the area in receiving yards by a ton.
That would be a career year for almost every other wide receiver.
Oh yeah, we can look on our.
And that's just 6 games.
There might have been kids on our all area team last season that had right around that production for an entire season. Yeah. I mean, he is, like I said, he could be, it's not out of the question that by the end of the season, depending on how long Lone Star is able to extend its season, that this could be the leading receiver in the entire state.
Early favorite for the Star Local Media Gridiron MVP.
All area MVP?
Yeah.
Gotta think so, man. It's been, I mean, it's impressive the year that he is having, but that's not to dismiss anything that Keon Wafer's been doing for Independence, because as gaudy as that yards per catch average is from Marvin Mims, Keon Wafer's even better. He has 25 catches on the year for 714 yards and 13 touchdowns, good for 28.6 yards per catch. He's tied for the area lead in receiving touchdowns. They've also got a worthy number 2 receiver. I don't know how to say his first name. Ziggle McGill? Ziggle
McGill, that's what we'll call him.
Zighill McMillan, I should say. He has 27 catches, 551 yards, 8 touchdowns, 20.4 yards per catch. They've got top 2 wide receivers that are both averaging more than 20 yards per catch. I wonder how many offenses, period, in the state have that. That is really tough to come by, and that obviously speaks to the job that Braxton is doing.
Yeah, I was just about to say, that means Braylon Braxton's numbers are through the roof.
Yeah.
You know, he's got 25 touchdowns just through the air alone this year, almost 1,700 yards through the air, more than Garrett Rangel, who's doing a phenomenal job in his first season with Lone Star. Something has to give in this game, and I picked Lone Star, but I still expect Braylon Braxton and the Knights to put up a good amount of points. Highland Park, they were able to put up 19 on them. You got to think Independence is going to score more than 19 points, right?
Can they? I don't know. I mean,
they're averaging
it is Highland Park after all. That's
true. But I
hate to hold any offense just to the Highland Park standard of production, because it's like I said, nobody's gotten over 20 on them. Highland Park's the closest, but that was with Chandler Morris and all that firepower that they have.
And that was a lot of late touchdowns when Lone Star already had a three score lead, so they were kind of we'll play the pass a little bit. We'll kind of lay off here a little bit. So Highland Park really should have scored less than 19 when it comes down to it. But so that leaves you to where's this Independence offense that's scoring 56 a game that has. What would you say? Braxton has the second most yards after the McKinney North kid? Yeah,
I believe he's number 2 in passing yardage. He is tied for the area lead in passing touchdowns. But again, they just haven't seen anything like.
I think ultimately it'll hurt them seeing that they started off district, and it's not their fault, but they started off district with Heritage and Liberty. I kind of want to see them play the Colony also. That would be awesome. And then Wakeland, that we could kind of test to see where they really, really are. But I still think they're legit. I still think they could be the second best team in this district. And there's going to be a lot of tests here, and like I said, even if they lose this game, by 20, you could still look, okay, well, they are still somewhat legit, because not everyone else is losing by a million. To Lone Star, but that first quarter, like we talked about, it's going to be huge, and I wouldn't be surprised if Independence kind of hits them in the mouth first, with an early touchdown.
One side of the ball that I guess we didn't mention, though, just in kind of breaking into offense versus defense, is what are the chances that perhaps the Independence defense can do something to make Lone Star uncomfortable? Because we did rattle off the numbers earlier, and Independence's defense has been among the best in the area, for what it's worth. And again, you have to factor in that competition and whatnot. So this will be their first test against an above-average offense, certainly. But then you look at just the job that Independence's defensive line has done with guys like Jaden Wallace, who's got 16 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Nick Carpin, 5 sacks, 14 tackles for loss. They've done a really good job dominating the line of scrimmage. Now you can speak to perhaps what Lone Star has in the trenches to counter that. But I don't know. Do we feel like this could be a chance where? I don't know if did Wakeland make any bold proclamation last week about trying to hold Marvin Mims to how many points? I don't know if Independence is going to go that far, but
I saw something on Twitter. I'm not going to call out names or say names or anything, but there was a hashtag, something about keeping Marvin under 20 points, or his limit would be 20 points. Well, he scored 21 points in the first.
You go into some games thinking, all right, let's hold this entire team under 20 points.
Imagine
not
being
one single player.
Imagine being that good. We're like, hey, okay, this guy's not going to score more than 3 touchdowns.
I dare you to score 3 touchdowns on us. Goodness.
And he scored 3 touchdowns in less than 6 minutes of the first quarter. But that's not all they have. It's not just Marvin Mims. The offense is so explosive. I've mentioned Jake Bogdan before, the running back, and they have 3 returning starters on the offensive line from last year as well. Okay. They're doing a great job protecting Rangel. They're like I said, they literally have no weakness. It's not like, okay, their offensive line is weak, so they just lob it up to Marvin Mims, or Mims is all they have. They don't have a running game, or they don't have a wide receiver too. They have 3 or 4 wide receivers that can go, including Mims. They have a running back who is, off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of a better running back right now. I mean, he's in contention. We got the guys from Little Elm, Jordan Hall and stuff like that. He's that good at running back. He kind of moved from slot receiver over. And like I said, that offensive line has been really good.
Okay.
Really, really good.
I was curious because they saw at least was on paper an elite pass rush against Highland Park with Prince Dorba. Do you recall if they had any fits with
Prince
him?
Dorba had 1 sack that I recall. That I remember specifically. He had 1 sack. Other than that, it's not like Rangel was running for his life. I rarely remember seeing Rangel run for his life at all.
Because if you're going to obviously try to upset the apple cart and throw that offense out of rhythm, obviously it helps to speed things up and make Rangel have to move around a bit more. And
he's more of a pocket passer. He's not prone. He's not MJ Rivers or Jason Shelley. He's not going to take off every other play. He's going to sit in the pocket. He's going to look through his his reads and everything and hit his man. But if you can get some pressure on Rangel and kind of say, hey, we're coming after you. You're only a sophomore. You haven't been in this position very long. We're going to make you feel really uncomfortable. Yeah, maybe, the offense can get kind of rattled, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah. So what kind of, I guess, put a
score? Yeah,
put a score to this because we're in unison on this one. We both do think Lone Star is going to remain undefeated. I'm not picking against Lone Star until maybe if they were to draw Highland Park in the playoffs.
Yeah, there's no reason to pick against Lone Star right now.
There's not yet been a case made to pick against them in any circumstance. So, kind of how do you foresee this one ultimately playing out, though?
Man, I Lone Star's still going to put up points. I think this game's somewhere in the ballpark of 47 to 28.
47
something like that.
That'd be a pretty respectable showing for Independence.
I think Independence will put up points. I'm not saying what quarter they're going to score these points at.
Yeah, because I guess context does matter. If they've started funneling in the 3rd and 4th stringers or whatnot, that's when
and then Braxton
comes to life.
And they stay on the field. But they're going to score more than 3 touchdowns. I would, they should, given that this offense's track record and the talent level of that offense. But I still think Lone Star I don't think they have enough firepower to keep up with them on both sides of the ball.
Awesome. And that's our game of the week. Independence versus Lone Star. Yes, the
Independence is going to win by 40 now. We're just...
Boy. That would be quite the shockwave. So, yes, you and I were not alone. The picket line was unanimous in picking Lone Star to remain undefeated, maintain that #1 state ranking against Independence. And so you, for our student athlete spotlight though, shine a little light on Independence. Haven't had a chance to talk with them yet. You were able to swing by campus, talk with quarterback Braylon Braxton in anticipation of this big game Thursday, 7 o'clock out at the Star. And on the other side of this break, we will see what Braylon Braxton had to say. Today's podcast is brought to you by Star Local Media. 14 newspapers and websites with a print distribution of 270,000 homes and monthly page views of 600,000 online. Star Local Media, your community voice for news. And now, let's get back to the podcast. I'm here with Independence quarterback Braylon Braxton. And Braylon, man, you Knights, y'all are off to a really, really hot start, undefeated. To start the year, man, what has been working? What's been that recipe to the success so far?
So far this year, recipe for success has been our O-line so far. There's a good group of guys. They keep me safe back there. I give our running backs lanes to run, and it's easy to just sit back there and throw the ball when you got those 5 blocking for you.
Now, mention some of those guys by name, because you and Wafer and a lot of the guys, y'all get all the notoriety, but who are some of those big offensive linemen keeping you safe back there?
Our center, we got to start off with our center, Tyler McKinney. He's a dog. He sees everything coming at him. He calls out all the blitzes before they happen. Then we got our right guard, Durga Cavetti. He's a senior. He's a strong guy. He's been on the starting offensive line since he was a sophomore, actually. And then you got Jack Carhu, our right tackle. He's also a senior. He's a big leader for us. And then we got our left guard, Ethan Kempros. He's a junior just like me. And then we got our left tackle, Trace Madrid. He's also a junior like me.
Now, like you just mentioned, it's your junior season. You started all the games last year as a sophomore.
Yes, sir.
How much different has this season been from last? Your second year here on the varsity.
Last year everything was just coming real fast at me. Like I felt like I was like everything was kind of like forced. Like I was like kind of reading slower. But this year everything's coming a lot more natural and everything's easier for me.
Now, how much easier has one of your receivers, Kyron Wafer, how much easier has he made your job this season?
He's made everything a lot easier. He's a big-time playmaker. He's a guy who I can look to anytime Like if it's the sticks, like 3rd and long, I can go to him. I can always look at him. If it's a guy pressed up on Kion, I probably know I'm gonna go to him.
Now, you mentioned earlier you're a Texans fan. You're from Houston,
Right.
so you're not originally from Dallas. You're not a Cowboys fan, but Houston has a really good quarterback, Deshaun Watson. Do you kind of try and model your game around him? And who are some other professional, either college or NFL professional quarterbacks you try and model your game after?
Well, right now, Deshaun Watson's actually my favorite quarterback in the NFL right now. I just like the way he plays the game. He's a dynamic guy. He spreads the ball around. And he's also a mobile guy who can get stuff done with his legs. So I like Deshaun Watson. But I also like Aaron Rodgers. I like the way he extends plays with his legs, but he's not a run-first guy, He tries to move around, but he moves around to throw.
Now, this week, y'all are facing y'all's toughest opponent yet, #1 Lone Star.
Right.
What's the preparations mentally and physically, heading into this week against, what should be the toughest opponent y'all face so far?
So far, we've just been looking at it like it's a normal game for us. We're not trying to do anything out of the norm. We're just coming in, going to work like we've been doing for the past weeks. Lone Star's a good team. They got a good group of guys over there. But, we're just going to go out and do what we do and try to get the victory.
How well do you know some of those guys over there? Do you know Marvin Mims and some of the other studs over there?
I know Marvin Mims from a few 7-on-7 things and a few camps. Yeah, I know him.
Now, I know you're not a defensive guy on this team, but how tough is he going to be to try and contain?
Marvin's another playmaker. I compare Marvin to our Kion. So our guys are getting good work against Kion and Zalil McMillan, another playmaker for us. So they should be ready to go head-to-head against him.
Yeah, no, McMillan, he hasn't been getting enough shine,
Right.
with Wafer, with the numbers he's been putting up. But talk about his impact to the offense as well.
Zalil McMillan, he's also another playmaker for us. He's another vertical threat, a big 6'2" kid. He has great hands, great route running. He's not a guy who can stretch the defense, so he's good for us too.
Now, for y'all to pull off the upset, this Friday against Lone Star, what has to happen?
We just got to we got to do everything right. We got to play as a team. We can't have mental mistakes. And because Lone Star is a good team, they're going to make plays, but we can't get down when they make plays. We just got to keep our head up and we got to keep pushing through.
Big thanks to Braylon Braxton for taking the time to chat with Brian for our Student Athlete Spotlight, helping preview our reader-voted Game of the Week, Lone Star versus Independence, Thursday, 7 o'clock out at the Star in Frisco. Hope it's a good one. Nevertheless, there were 4 other games that were up for contention on the Game of the Week poll. We'll talk about those, give our picks for those as well. First off, on a quick tangent, Brian, I was so disappointed in the way the picket line turned out this week. We pick 10 in-market games. We try to make them a nice combination of the most high profile and also the most competitive. Mm-hmm. And theoretically that should breed a lot of contention and dissension and whatnot, and a lot of people going in a bunch of different directions because there's a lot of games this week between some really good football teams. Yeah. But for the first time in maybe the history of the picket line, or at least as far as I can recall, we were unanimous on every single freaking game, and I'm so upset.
The worst thing that could have ever happened. In my time here, I've never seen this before.
Because it doesn't make sense in theory, because when you look over some of the games that we're about to talk about, they are very competitive games on paper. You can make a case for both of these teams. It's not like we picked a bunch of blowouts. Yeah. But whether it was just there wasn't enough evidence to sway one or two people in the direction of one team, because sometimes, listen, if all things are equal, sometimes we'll just default and pick the team that's in our coverage area or whatever, that we know the closest. And there weren't really any cases of that where you would be taking a team that might theoretically be an underdog in the matchup. But nevertheless, yes, all of our picks this week were unanimous. I'm so sorry for that. I hate it. I wish I could go back and redo this.
I'm on the verge of just changing 1 or 2 of my picks but I'm in first place.
Yeah, you got no reason to, man. We're playing catch up behind you. Albeit not by much. This has been also the most contentious picket line as far as how closely knit everybody is in the standings.
Just 4 games separates first from
I'm in 4th place, and there's 2 games separating you and I. Yeah. So let's see. All right, so let's talk about a few of the other games that we have on tap this week that were up for contention for Game of the Week. This is a big week in District 66A. We finally get some matchups between the Power 5 schools in that district, the Lewisville ISD and Coppell cluster. We get 2 big matchups. Marcus versus Hebron is probably on paper the most high profile of them. Both teams are 4-1, 2-0 on the season. This one is at Marauder Stadium in Marcus, a notoriously tough place to play.
I'm surprised no one picked Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, you can make I know we've kind of been, trumpeting the Hebrons, the district front runner and whatnot. They were my pick to win the district title this year, so I don't know if that was playing on any sort of preference in which one team may lead. I though think, if I was making this pick at the start of the year, I would have gone Hebron in a landslide. Now though, with what these teams have shown, I think this game could be very, very competitive. The Marcus offense, as we talked about at the start of the year, thought there was a chance the Marcus offense might be able to emerge as the number one offense in the district. Wouldn't you know, but they're averaging 454 yards per game this season. That is number one in the district. But they're going up against the number one defense in the district, Hebron, 271 yards allowed per game. They had that incredible performance against Arlington Martin. I know the final score might not reflect that, 33-14. It was not a game that was sort of any indictment against the Hebron defense. They were incredible in that one. But Marcus's offense has really hit its stride as of late. They've scored at least 50 points in 3 consecutive games. But you got to factor in the competition. They started off district play against 2 of the Irving schools, did what you're supposed to do against the 2 Irving schools. They did hang 55 on Waxahachie, so that's of note. But now we're going to answer the question of whether or not this offensive surge has been more so related to the competition, or if that unit has really forged an identity. Because they did have a bit of a slower start to the year. I was out there for the season opener against Arlington Bowie when they were kind of held in check. They scored only 14 points, I recall. And then it took them a little while to get going against McKinney Boyd that following week.
That kind of concerns me. If you're a good team, if you're a team capable of beating Hebron, you should be blowing out a team like McKinney Boyd. Yeah, who still doesn't have an identity yet either.
It's a case where, again, you're not sure whether or not it was still an offense trying to find its sea legs.
Still week 2.
There were a lot of new pieces, and again, it was the second week of the season, so teams are still trying to work some kinks out. So, but nevertheless, they've looked great. Garrett Nussmeyer, who was the special guest on Monday's podcast, he has been lights out. Tyson Edwards is among the top workhorse backs that you'll find in the area, and then they have a really balanced receiving core. J. Michael Sturdivant, Christian Espinoza, Dallas Dudley, lots of guys they can spread the ball around to, so they don't really feel the need to force feed it to one guy like Sturdivant, who's a Division I prospect. They got a lot of ways to beat you. Hebron, on the other hand, they have a very dynamic running offense, led by Jalen Lott, Isaiah Broadway, the quarterback Carson Harris. Marcus has held up really well against the run too, allowing just under 110 yards per game on the ground. Hebron, I wonder how much, if they don't have just the special teams collapse against Martin and just that 24-0 deficit at the end of the first half, despite their defense holding Martin to negative yardage on offense, how much that might, if that game just goes any other way, how much that might color the perception of what Hebron is, because Hebron could theoretically be undefeated if not for those repeated special teams gaffes against Martin, and then you're looking at a team that maybe is state ranked and whatnot. So Hebron's been a little, the offense hasn't been exactly what I've envisioned. I thought that they, and granted, I guess losing Trajan Bridges is pretty significant. The passing game is still really yet to find a consistent groove. Now they do have, we were just talking on the first half of the podcast about yards per catch with the 2 dynamic receivers in the Independence Lone Star matchup. Hebron wide receiver Nick Frazier has 10 catches on the year for 361 yards and 4 touchdowns. Yes, 36.1 yards per catch.
Why does he only have 10 catches?
It's again, it is not exactly what has been a high volume passing attack this season. They do predicate things on that backfield with Lawton Broadway, but nevertheless, yes, I'm sticking with Hebron in this one. Again, I think this could be a much closer game than I otherwise would have expected, but I just feel better about Hebron's resume up to this point, what they've shown against higher caliber competition, and we'll see how it shakes out. The picket line was in alignment on that one. Like I said, they're all unanimous. So everybody picked Hebron, although again, I think this one could be a little bit closer than that might lead one to believe. And then you have a matchup over at Coppell at Buddy Eccles Field, Friday 7 o'clock, where Coppell welcomes Lewisville. 2 more teams that figured to vie for one of those 4 playoff spots. If you think back to our season preview podcast, this was actually the matchup that I think me and Taylor kind of settled on. Okay, the winner of this matchup is getting a playoff spot, and the loser is ultimately going to be left out. Because you got to think they're all going to take care of business against the Irving schools. It's just about how they do head-to-head against one another. So, it's a matchup between a Lewisville team that has I mean, again, they had the hard luck loss to to Flower Mound, but beyond that, they look to be improved at the very least on the offensive side of the ball. Defense set such a high bar last year. They've been strong. Perhaps maybe a slight step back and whatnot, but still a really solid team overall. To what they've shown with a really high efficiency passing attack with Taylon Green at quarterback, and then you got the two receivers, Armani Winfield, Isaiah Stevens. It's a lot of. It is an element that teams have not had to worry about when defending Lewisville for some time, is having two dynamic playmakers on the outside. With Coppell, you credit them for this, despite their record being 2-3 and 1-1 in district.
It's all close games.
They've played everyone tough, with the exception of, again, they blew out Irving MacArthur. You throw that game out, though. You throw that game away. The average Coppell game across those other four has been decided by 6.3 points. So yeah, when this is against Allen, this is against Hebron, this is against Saxe. So win or lose, it's always a close game. So at the very least, you should be expecting a fun, competitive game.
Yeah, I can't figure them out, and I'm surprised someone didn't pick Coppell.
Here's what deterred me from going that far, because as close as those games have been, they are just 1-3 in those aforementioned contests. So this is a young team, and again, when the going gets tough, it's just been a little bit tougher to close the deal in these closely contested matchups in the fourth quarter. So yes, until I can see them truly show that they're capable of getting over the hump against someone not named LD Bell, I've got to side with them.
Wow, shots fired at LD Bell.
Sorry, man. It is what it is. So yes, that's why I ultimately am going Lewisville in this matchup. Again, unanimous, everybody picking the Farmers to upend the Cowboys in a game that should, yes, I don't know if you want to call this a playoff eliminator, because I think that the gap between these elite teams in this district, it's not that much. I don't think there is a head and shoulders favorite above the fray. But this one, Coppell Lewisville, a very, very important matchup relative to the playoff seeding. Prosper versus Jesuit.
Boy.
This gets interesting now. Over in District 968. This one is at Jesuit at Postel Stadium, Friday, 7 o'clock. Brian, you can speak to this one, because, Prosper, man, this is the Prosper defense has been outstanding this season.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the numbers they are allowing, only 209.2 yards, 12.4 points allowed. Number one in the district in both categories. They've been terrific, and this is, I think, with you can make a case for Flower Mound for sure, but you can also make a case for Jesuit being the most dynamic offense that they will have seen up to this point. So, what is kind of your initial read on this matchup? Which you can make a case, biggest tested date for Prosper.
More dynamic than Flower Mound?
You can make a case again. You can make a case just because they do have So they have so many different options, whereas you know what to expect with Pierce Hudgens. There's probably about one or two receivers for Flower Mound that can take care of you. You have two running backs, though, E.J. Smith and Jay Taylor, both can do great things with the ball in their hands. Like, again, E.J. Smith is, I will say this, though, there is no disputing, E.J. Smith is the best skill position player that they've seen this season.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah.
And the thing
who's better at Allen?
Oh.
Well, besides the two receivers.
Yeah. Outside of that,
that running back position.
Yeah, no, he's better. He's a better prospect for sure than Selden Manning. But I just got to see Jesuit against McKinney Boyd, so at least I have an idea of what they can do and what they bring to the table. And for as great as E.J. Smith is, it's not all about him. They don't just run everything. They don't just live and die by how E.J. Smith plays. They have, again, Jake Taylor, who's going to see just as much action out of the backfield as E.J. will. They line them up both at wide receiver. I mean, they'll use EJ all over the field, whether it's inside or outside in the backfield. And then there's like 3 or 4 different receivers that are no guys that are going to just blow your doors off, but really, really effective possession-style receivers that can move the chains. It's a really, really efficient, high-octane offense that can really mix the tempo up on you. And I think they can do some schematic things that Prosper hasn't had to worry about yet. So I'm just fascinated to see, because, again, Prosper's defense has been so great, and this is their first test against, you can say, again, like Flower Mound is, I don't want to dismiss them because that's really good offense in its own right, but I think Jesuit's got a little bit of a similar ceiling as far as what they're capable of as well. Now, hopefully they have a better showing for their sake, because I do want to learn as much about this Prosper defense as I can.
This is going to be a true test for them. If they get run over, and their defense, looks sloppy. They can't force turnovers like they did against McKinney, the game that I saw them play. And by the way, they made McKinney's with the Rojas kid and then Isaiah Rojas. They have some area leaders in yards per game and whatnot. And they made them look like sophomores. I mean, they are sophomores, but they made them look, not as explosive and not as dominant like as they were with other teams. But if E.J. Smith is running all over them and the other running back you mentioned and whatnot, and is this time to kind of hit the panic button on this for Prosper defensively? Because there's been a lot of chatter. If they have
one underwhelming showing, then talk about
I think it's more for us guys on Twitter and stuff. But I think in turn they should be fine. I mean, I'm surprised someone didn't pick Jesuit for this game also. But then again, Prosper hasn't given us something to pick against them.
That's the point. So, because there's also the other side of the ball too, and Prosper's offense has been so explosive with Jackson Berry, J.T. Lane, Tyler Bailey. They're going to score points on Jesuit for sure.
It wouldn't shock me if Jesuit, snuck this game out, close one, and, it would not surprise me. But it also wouldn't surprise me if Prosper just blew them out by, 3, 4, or more scores in this one. So Prosper's easily the favorite, but Jesuit they can make a big statement here with the win over Prosper, and they could really solidify themselves as that quote unquote second best team in the district.
Jesuit is at the very least going to be battle tested in a way that Prosper really hasn't been this season.
Yeah, and that's another thing. They're that non-district schedule, and then starting off at Plano East last week. It's not really a tough test there, albeit they shut them out. They start the year with Rowlett. What is Rowlett? We talked about it. What is 10-6A?
They're undefeated in 10-6A. That's what they are.
Means nothing. And then Timber Creek, and you can look at that Flower Mound game, and what they did is really, really impressive. But
I think it is. I don't want to. I've heard some folks on social media maybe kind of poke holes in that and whatnot. But no, I mean, between Blake Short and Pierce Hudgens, that was the number one returning quarterback receiver running back combination in the area relative to what they produced last year. So I mean, that's a really good offense that they shut down. So I do put some merit in that, and being up 5 touchdowns or whatever it was at the half.
What do you think this score is?
I like Prosper to win this game ultimately, probably about 14, 17 points.
Okay, safe double digits. Yeah. Nothing too crazy.
Yeah. Ultimately, again, I do think, even though I'm so fascinated in the Prosper defense versus Jesuit offense exchanges, I think Prosper's going to win the flip-flop of that equation a bit more often than not.
I just hope Prosper isn't overlooking this game or any of the other 9-6A opponents, because they have Allen on their minds. Whatever they've said, what I've seen on Twitter and whatnot, Coach Schmidt and the coaches, they're going to keep them focused each week. But I'm hoping the players, I'm not pointing anyone out. I'm not saying anyone specifically. I'm just saying, just from what I've seen on Twitter, and there's been a lot of chatter.
This is uncharted waters for them.
They want to be compared to Allen. They think that they're Allen's biggest test in a lot of sports, not just football. They think, Prosper thinks, which for good reason, they've been dominant in so many sports. They want to be up on that upper echelon with an elite program like Allen, and I hope they're not, thinking about November 1st rather than October 11th.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's October 9th right now when we're recording this, so there's still plenty of time. So you would hope that they're not already looking ahead to a matchup that's still
because Jesuit
3 weeks away.
Jesuit is more than capable of beating them in this district. Yeah. So that's one of my main concerns. I hope they're just not overlooking.
Again, there's not enough to sway any of us from going and Prosper in this matchup. Once again, unanimous. We're all picking Prosper over Jesuit. The last game on we're talking about. A nice little rivalry clash out in Mesquite. Mesquite versus North Mesquite. Let's see, Mesquite 5-1 overall, 1-1 in district play, going up against a North Mesquite team that is 2-3, 0-1. This game is Friday, 7:30, out at Mesquite Memorial Stadium. Going to do a little history lesson for this one. So this is the 50th matchup in this rivalry's history. Overall, Mesquite holds a 27-22 advantage. However, North Mesquite would beg to differ and maybe say that it's perhaps 26-22-1. So
go on.
If you read what Devin Hassan wrote in the Mesquite News previewing this matchup, he touches on what has to be the most unique installment of this rivalry, and this was back in 1983, before either you or I were born, Brian, when Mesquite and North Mesquite staged a scoreless tie. Can you imagine what it would be like to cover a scoreless tie in this day and age?
Where do you even begin guiding that story?
I already feel like it's punishment when that happens to me covering a soccer match.
That's the first thing that came to mind is 0-0. Yeah.
But nevertheless, though, obviously.
But they gave someone the win.
Yes. So let me get to that. So overtime wasn't a thing back then.
Boo.
So instead they used a series of tiebreakers in order to decide winners if the game so happened to be tied at the end of regulation. The first tiebreaker was penetrations. You ever heard of that in football terms?
No.
Penetrations was basically something that they used to track way back in the old days, where you got any time you advanced inside the opponent's 20-yard line, that counted as a penetration. So at the end of the game, if it was 5-4 or whatever in terms of penetrations, then that team was declared the victor. I know, strange. Good thing overtime was invented.
Yeah, but it's all about what you do once you get in the red zone. That's what football is all about.
Can you imagine? Like you got a, some running back on like 1st and 10 from the 22 has like a measly 3-yard carry to get down to the 19, and crowd goes wild because they're inside the 20. We got a penetration. So that was that was the first tiebreaker. Well, in this particular matchup, the Skeeters and the Stallions were tied.
Of course they were.
So the next tiebreaker was the number of first downs for each team. Okay. And to that, Mesquite had a 12-9 advantage, so by law, they were declared the winner by virtue of a 12-9 advantage in first downs.
That is so flawed. When did they get rid of that? Next year?
I couldn't tell you, man, but yes, thank goodness that sport evolved past the penetration, first down, tiebreaker system, because, overtime football, I'd say, is a much better idea.
Oh, yeah.
So all that's to say, I'm picking Mesquite, and so is everybody else.
I'm picking Mesquite to win, the penetration battle. I'm picking them to win the first down battle, and I'm picking them to win the actual touchdown battle.
Whether this game is taking place in 2019 or 1983, we're going with the Skeeters in this one. So, that is a look at some of the marquee matchups that are on. At least we're up for game of the week as far as what we're actually going to cover. I know what you're doing on Thursday.
Oh, yeah. I'm at the Star, Lone Star Independence, but Friday, another game we didn't really touch on because we had so many other good games this week. Little Elm is hosting Wakeland, so the second week in a row, I'll see both teams, and that should be a good Friday showdown. Hopefully the weather isn't too bad. I'm seeing it's supposed to rain. It's going to be like in the 40s or 50s Friday night.
Right. All of a sudden we're getting some fall weather in the mix for a change.
Yep. So should be a good one.
I will be, let's see, I got nothing on Thursday. I will be out on Friday, though, up at Kimbrough Stadium in Murphy, covering a District 9-6A battle between Allen and Plano East. Both teams coming off their bye week. Based on what they've shown to this point, on paper, probably not the most competitive of matchups. History, though, says that Allen has fared things have been a little bit tougher on Allen inside Kimbrough Stadium. There have been a couple of meetings in the past. I was there for one of them. The last time I saw this matchup was in 2016 when Plano East was leading midway through the fourth quarter, and then Allen staged some late heroics, and they end up winning 38-31. So you have that. There was a game that was actually on ESPN back in the day. It's kind of a showcase game for Allen, who was nationally ranked at the time, and they ended up winning that game like 42-38 or something like that. It was a really unexpected shocker that Plano East was able to push them like that. I'd be, I'm not going to lie, I'd be a little surprised if Friday's game turned in a same manuscript, but there's at least precedent to suggest that, perhaps playing inside Kimbrough has been a little bit more of a house of horrors than most road venues for Allen.
I'm not the expert in this department, especially with Allen in East, but your gamer might be done at halftime.
I listen. I put it out on my for the previews that I do. I always take a winner and a margin of victory. I picked Allen by 35, so that tells you so much for history and whatnot. But yes, that's what I'm going to be covering on Friday. Folks, you can follow us along on Twitter. I'm at Welch SLM. He is at Bryan Murphy with an underscore at the end. Afterwards we'll have our stories. We'll have a rapid reaction podcast, video packages, the whole nine up at our website, starlocalmedia.com, for y'all to check out. And that'll do it for this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. Let's see. So we'll be back with, we'll have a bunch of rapid reactions over the weekend from all the games that we cover live. So it's a busy slate on Thursday and a busy slate on Friday, so plenty of those for y'all to check out. And then we'll be back on Monday with another episode of the podcast itself. Folks, you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.